I can see 8 questions, and please ask questions. If you're patient enough, I will answer. I will stay as long as it is required to answer all of you, but that may be too long for some of you. So I'll go one by one. So the first question is by Preeti Ghatori. Okay, she asks, is oligomer intermediate structure can be alpha helical when we are studying the behavior of proteins in presence of nanoparticles? Okay, very good question. Generically, yes. I mean, if we look at some other protein, it could be alpha helical. In fact, alpha helical pores are also known, and certainly possible. What I showed you are results for particular protein called amyloid beta. There we know it is antiparallel beta sheet, like a pore. Vishal Rai, I don't know if it's my colleague from IISER Bhopal, who is a fantastic peptide chemist, but at least the name is the same. With multiple species in equilibrium that can undergo induced structural changes, what is the most evolved approach for inhibiting amyloid-led toxicity? Very good question. So I'll give you a short answer. Of course, it's a hard question. The short answer is that if we can find out which part of the protein is interacting with the rest of the cell to give toxicity, and I suggested that is the N-terminal, and we can find out something that quickly binds to it, and we have strategies, published strategies, some we are working with, which can try to find that, but it's a big task, then there is something that we can do. But I also can tell you what is likely not going to give you the answer. All the papers, which are very good papers, very painstakingly done papers, which are finding out structures of the fibrils, which are there you read in Science and Nature, none of them tells exactly how it is going to be toxic. The answer has to come from this messy problem, which is a heterogeneous mixture of oligomers, and we are trying to find out in that heterogeneous mixture, is it a particular one, okay, that is toxic? And that's a hard question to ask, but perhaps there is a partial answer, and then we can target that and try to find out what. If it's the same, Vishal, I enjoyed your ACS seminar talk tremendously last time when you gave it a few weeks ago. I'll go to Mitra K. The question is, in the single molecule bleaching, doesn't the fluorescence intensity regain with time by diffusion? Okay, so single molecule photobleaching we're doing on a, very good question, on a lipid bilayer. Okay, the lipid bilayer, the diffusion is slow. So we can sort of look at the same guy. We know they move a little bit, but we know which one is which because they're dispersed. Each individual particle is far off from another particle. So before we sort of lose them by diffusion, we are tracking them. We see that we put enough power, so we photobleach them. So that's the answer. But otherwise, yes, if they diffuse very fast, we would not. Tushar Ranjan Panda says, DCS Tushar Ranjan Panda says, one of our students. Good to see you, Tushar. What happens to the remnant orphaned protein part? Good question. You want to solve it? Okay, whenever you're in campus, come down. We don't know. Okay, what working with Koti, my colleague who does a lot of AFM, taught us is that very funny. These remnant part, if you have a multi-protein string, and Koti works with monomers of ubiquitin, can hang and work as a nucleus for the next guy. So we have been able to make things which are not single unit, but double units, but only when these decoy peptides are around. So one gets kicked out, but it goes and invades the next one. Not every time, but many times. So you can see it by pulling that sometimes two of the proteins which are got co-folded because they're joined by this unfold. And the single molecule force pulling experiments show that. It's an interesting question, what happens. Then Juhi Datta, how to choose the decoy peptides means what are the criteria the decoy peptides? Okay, that's a very good question. This is where Anirban's creativity comes in, which is if you want, let's say, a folding catalyst, okay, then you have to know which part is the most important part for folding, which is like a kinetic barrier. Because many parts of the protein fold and they're cooperative folding. So they all fold together, but some parts, some things usually present you the kinetic barrier. So the kinetic, if you know, and that's hard to know, but many proteins There are many experiments which are finding out how to know it. So for maybe a few dozen proteins, it's known. You will like to go in with that part. And then the rest should be fairly easy, but not straightforward by any means. You have to put in maybe cysteine or some extra chemical staples and make sure that the shape you get is similar to what you had in the original protein. But if that is a rate limiting step, the formation of that, then you put it in, and I bet you'll have a protein catalyst, a folding catalyst. Another of our student, this year, Shrujit Kumar Das. Shrujit, what kind of staples were used here? Okay, what sort of interactions occur when the stapling occurs? So the staples here were just very simple-minded one, and those were just disulfide linkages, and we put two cysteines where we want them, and Anirban put two cysteines, and they got chemically linked, and that is enough to roughly constrain the rest of the peptide. See, the peptide has some sort of a minima or near minimum when it's trying to fold, but there's too much entropy when you have cut it open from the rest of the protein. So it never settles down in that shape. But if you put one constraint, the entropy cost is met to a large extent, and these things come very close to that thing. So it's a disulfide bridge. But we are also playing with some of your colleagues in the department. For example, Anup is playing with chemical staples. So these are bromoxylene staples which can stabilize alpha helix, for example. So the chemical intuition has to play in here. How do I structure a peptide? In fact, right now, what we are trying to do is make a peptide. The world is trying to do it, which can attach to the part of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, which robs its ability to attack a human protein, which is called the ACE2. So part of the ACE2 you snip off and hope that it goes and attaches, which doesn't happen unless you stabilize it. So we are trying to stabilize it. Then you'll see papers, including a recent paper by David Baker's group in Science, which shows chemical staples, where to put it and how to stabilize it to increase this ability. Okay, then A. Konar. Hello, Professor Maiti. Great science. Thank you. Apurva Lal Konar. Okay, Apurva. From ICER Mobile. I have a couple of questions. Do we know how the transition from parallel to anti-parallel transition occurs in molecular level in presence of membrane? Okay, and how do we control one nanoparticle inside the core of vesicles, and how is the dynamics and stability of such nanoparticles? Okay, two different questions. The first one is, we do not know if the fibrils will form in the membrane. The most recent paper by Rob Tico, which is still in the archives and I know is being reviewed in Science, and hopefully will get published there, which is, it's funny. We thought that it's all a parallel structures. If you look at every structural paper of fibrils, it's all parallel beta sheet. Till now, every published structure. But this one, which is still in bioRxiv, shows the core is parallel, but there is a supporting strand, which is anti-parallel exactly as we found it in 2014 in an Anguante paper, where you put solid-state NMR and fluorescence together. So it seems like that you form those anti-parallel beta sheets together, somehow they nucleate the parallel beta sheet, and it still remains as supporting strands and an inner core which becomes parallel beta sheet fibril-like thing. Second question is, these are actually reasonably stable. You can make lipid bilayer coats on these things. Of course, many of the times they will precipitate because the coat would not be proper, etc. But once you make them for hours, in fact for days, you'll have very stable nanoparticles individually wrapped, and you can do TEM of them, as I showed some of that. And you can do a lot of experiments. They are fantastic things because you get the plasmonic effect, yet you're talking about membrane architecture and membrane proteins, which plasmonics typically doesn't do. So if you're doing SARS or even fluorescence quenching, that's a great way to go. Preeti Roy, does folding catalyst called be structure independent? Okay, could be. Okay, or beta hairpin provides some important features. So as I explained, the folding catalyst is very specific to protein which you're trying to fold. So you have to look at the structure that forms first, or is the rate limiting structure in that protein. So in this case of ubiquitin, that was a beta hairpin, so we had to make a beta hairpin. But in the case of some other protein, it could be something else, could be an alpha helix. So you have to go to the protein and find out, and it will be specific to that protein. This is the fun part. We are trying to see if we can individually address proteins, even in a mixture, like inside the cell, and muck up their folding, while the other proteins don't care. It'll be fun to do some kind of funny synthetic biology. Okay, so then Pradeep Chatterjee, if I'm missing someone, you just, Manoj Kumar Pradhan is there, sorry. Preeti Roy. Saptarshi Mukherjee, it says doctor, so I bet it is my friend Saptarshi Mukherjee from IISER Bhopal. If that is so, hi Saptarshi. Regarding the second part, is it limited to the number of amino acids? Well, to give a shape to a particular part of a protein, you want to look at a decoy, which is a part. So you'll take a part, and to give it a shape, then if you make it very large, it's very difficult to give it a given shape. It'll be a dream thing. Two proteins interact with each other, and this is the interface, and you can just, but suppose there's an antibody, and the rest of the antibody, the 200 kilodaltons of it, suppose you can chop off and just maintain this one surface. That'll be great, but it'll be very difficult to do. Perhaps it will be possible in the next 10 years or so. But here we talked about simple proteins, which let's say it's alpha helical, or let's say it's an antiparallel beta sheet. The motif is already there. We put a staple here and there, and we pretty much get what we want. So that's why the number, if you have a large protein, they'll try its own jumble of folding. Manoj Kumar Pradhan, is the protein natural or synthetic? So, okay. So, the protein itself, the ubiquitin, if I'm thinking about the ubiquitin, it's a natural protein, but it's produced in bacteria. For experiments, you don't get it from our own cells, from bacteria. So then, in case it's like a biotechnologically produced protein, if that's your question. The decoy is synthetic. We put it in a solid phase. That's what Anirban does. Solid phase peptide synthesizer. He puts the disulfide link and then mixes it with the protein. So hope that answers that question. Then Pradeep Chatterjee, can we input active monomer inside and staple protein going outside the original protein to form a oligomer? Okay. So as I mentioned a little bit, what we observed with Coty's AFM pulling experiment, yes, if you have two of these proteins close by, the decoy can go in here and then kick out this guy, which can grab hold of the next guy, and it becomes a chain. So we have seen at least dimers, kind of domain swap dimers. There could be longer chains. I do not know, but a part of what you're guessing is true. Okay, then the next question, Anuj. Could bilayer packing defects owing to the geometry of the lipids aid in the A-beta aggregation and lead to neuronal cell death? Okay, so I think that the bilayer, even with defect-free bilayer, is a thing that the amyloid beta oligomer can attach to. In fact, we do measurements. We have been doing measurements with fluorescence correlation spectroscopy over years. Shows that it is very high affinity. Once they enter into the bilayer, it creates defects. In the sense, it creates a hole or some other defects. Whether you have a defect in the bilayer that can induce the attachment, perhaps, but I don't then think it will be the same way that the protein sits in the intact bilayer, if that's what you meant. And somebody who doesn't have a name, HSB, okay? So thanks for nice presentation. We are welcome. I have a basic question. How one defines hydrophobic parts of the proteins? Is it true that hydrophobic amino acids do not interact with water? Well, hydrophobic parts are actually well defined. It comes from the basic chemistry, something that cannot do hydrogen bonding with the water. Okay, so these are the non-polar parts. If methyl groups or something would not be able to hydrogen bond. And the hydrophobic interaction comes from the fact that the water would like to hydrogen bond, because if you put something in, then the parts of the water, the hydrogen bond gets dangling because it finds a methyl and cannot hydrogen bond. So that changes the structure of the water around the molecule, because water has to be in a particular orientation so that its hydrogen bonding is satisfied, and that robs it of its entropy. So it's an entropic cost. But the basis of hydrophobicity is basically oil-like substance, is very well understood. Okay, then Pradeep Chatterjee again. If every protein has a memory of folding, from where this memory came? Is memory coded in DNA or other in the cell? This is what I started with. It's not a memory. Think about a spring. Okay, you fold it in a certain way. Go to a car and pick out something. Okay, and that you can pull the spring apart and leave it. It will go back to its shape. Okay, because that's the minimum energy. So 3.5 billion years of evolution has taught nature how accident after accident, mutation after mutation, how things become stable in water. So it has no memory at all. Chris Anfinsen showed that and got a Nobel Prize for it. It need not have any memory at all. It is the free energy minimum. It will get there. Okay, even if you have no. Ankur Chaudhary, have you tried to staple the amyloid beta peptide, and what do you expect will happen if you do that? Yeah, this is one of the projects in the lab. Not only that's Arpan is doing, not only we are trying to staple it, we're trying to staple it with something which will be photoactivatable. So, which will change, it's an azobenzene-like thing, which will change the distance between two strands as we shine one color of light and change the distance if we shine the other color. Unfortunately, we don't have experimental results yet, but it's a very, very interesting experiment that I have been interested in. So as and when Arpan does it, I will let you know. I will read it somewhere. Thank you for the question. HC again, hydrophobicity question is from Himanshu, I see. Oh, Himanshu Vishwal. Okay. Okay. Himanshu was a student and now head of the department in NICER and doing wonderfully, both in theory and experiments. Okay, thank you. Anup A. Question regarding ubiquity in part of the talk. What happens if you introduce a non-nucleus folding intermediate instead of the nucleus? So I showed you part of that. We put in things which had a random sequence. Okay, actually the same composition, but a random sequence. And it didn't have as much of an effect. It had a little bit of an effect, but not as much. So it needs to have the proper nucleus for it to recognize and for the rest of the protein to fold around it. Pallab Datta, thank you, Professor Maiti, for this beautiful, you're most welcome. I found especially the last part very interesting. My question is it then possible to investigate the folding pathway of a protein by providing different small folded parts of it through the unfolded forms? Yes, absolutely. That would be a very good thing. Thanks for the suggestion. Maybe we should think of that. Excuse me. Thank you, Pallab. And then Shubhankar, is it possible to probe the kinetics of the reversible aggregation process through FCS study? Yes, we do it all the time. We do it by looking at the intrinsic fluorophores such as tyrosine that is there in amyloid beta itself, or by attaching other fluorophores to it, or by putting fluorophores which non-covalently attach. People look at kinetics by, let's say, ThioT. This is a fluorophore which becomes very fluorescent, which it attaches to the amyloid fibrils. Anirban has been part of a paper which shows that if you put something else, TPE, TPP, it gives much more information. But yes, we can look at both towards the aggregation and back from the aggregation. Both can be seen with fluorescent things. Thanks for the question. So we can measure kinetics of aggregation or disaggregation. Doesn't the isolation condition for experiment affect protein folding? If you are asking that, does the protein fold the same way inside a cell and as it does in a test tube? And I would support your question, most likely not. There's a lot of crowding inside the cell. There could be other interactions, and but these to some extent can be simulated using Ficol or some other crowding agents in solution. Obviously, not exactly putting in the same condition as in a cell. Intracellular folding can also be looked at. We haven't looked at it, but if you can put some labels like fluorescent label, that to some extent is possible. It's a valid concern. We haven't done it. It's all our experiments that I showed you are in vitro. Manas Seal, nice talk, Dr. Maiti. Thank you, Manas. Is there any evidence for membrane-bound A-beta oligomer in Alzheimer's patients? Okay, and for in vivo fluorescence microscopy with amyloid beta, can the fluorescence label have an effect on structure, as A-beta is pretty small with only 40 residues? Both are very valid questions. The first question is whether membrane-bound A-beta is seen. So there are some experiments with cells where membrane-bound A-beta, in fact, A-beta becoming larger while it is membrane-bound, are seen. I'm not aware of patient things. You're talking about Alzheimer's, which happens in humans, doesn't happen in rat models, etc. There's something akin to it. You can transgenic in transgenic rats. It's not exactly amyloid Alzheimer's. So we really don't know, and I don't know whether these things are seen, because they are small objects without any label on them. To get it out of a human brain, which probably has to come from a cadaver, just recently deceased cadaver, is a tough question. So I don't think that will be easily answered. So, but anyway, the short answer is I do not know. And in vivo fluorescence microscopy are saying whether the label can have an effect. Absolutely. The labels have a 10% of the molecular weight of the A-beta, 400 versus the 4,000. What we have been able to do, without being, putting apologies for it, what we've been able to do is to change the labels in different types. And we see the same kind of features that we see. And therefore, we do believe that these labels are not playing fundamental with the fundamental nature of the aggregation process. That's all I say. Okay, then Simesh Bhaskar, very interesting talk. Thank you. It's interesting. It acts like a catalyst. How is the decoy peptide done? What chemicals are involved? Are they well-established techniques? Thank you. Also, how is the fluorescence study? How does it assist in study of specific orientation of protein? So 2 questions. I think I have answered the first one already. The decoy was made with using a disulfide link. It's there's hardly any. You put DMSO and the disulfide linkage happens. ONIBAN actually does it slightly differently on the beat, but those are established techniques. They are well-established techniques how to make these staples. Okay, the decoy itself you have to design. If you want a protein whose folding you want to affect, the rate of folding or its folding you want to affect, then you have to design looking at the part that has the maximum effect on the folding. And the fluorescence study, how does it assist in the understanding the specific orientation? I told you that the nanoparticle, I probably didn't have time to explain, quenches fluorescence. That quenching is has a very strong distance dependence. It's about the plasmonic field is about, as a 1/e distance of about a couple of nanometers. So something which is very close will get quenched very highly. Something which is as much as 3 or 4 nanometers away would not get quenched. That's the thickness of a bilayer. So wrapping a bilayer around it, something that is on the outer side of the bilayer most likely would not get quenched very much. Something which is on the inner side of the bilayer can get quenched. And it is a general technique that can be applicable to any membrane proteins if you can label it. It can also be done with Raman, as we showed earlier. But of course, fluorescence is a very, very sensitive technique and very easy technique. Apurva, thank you very much. You just thanked me. Okay. The next question is by Abhishek Chatar. Hi, Abhishek. Does similar tertiary fold structure of 2 proteins imply similar function as well? What other factors than protein structure can dictate function? Good questions again. Typically, yes, there are proteins which do similar stuff, which have different sequences, but somehow there's convergent evolution, which means that they ultimately have the same shape or similar shape. Okay, not identical, of course, but similar shape. If you look at same protein in different species, that's basically that. But there are also opposite things. Things which have similar folds do different things. That's possible. But ultimately, for doing a particular function, you need a particular structure. So what other factors? The other factors could be something like even cofactors. Same protein, you take the cofactor away and it would not function. So those are easy things. Small mutations, if you look at the active area of, let's say, an enzyme, if you do one mutation, suppose there is a serine there, one mutation completely changes how it will, the folding remains the same. Folding is not affected if you mutate the serine, but the way it does the chemistry with the substrate can completely change because it the transition state, let's say, has to make a hydrogen bond with the substrate, then only it will work. And you take out the serine and it doesn't form any. So yes, the folding is not the only thing. The actual chemical nature of, especially around the active area, would be dictating that. Abhishek Chatar, I found a strain of a virus with a few non-synonymous substitutions compared to the reference sequence. Can you please suggest me a tool to understand if those changes, amino acids, produce any change in function? Okay. So for this, Abhishek, you have to approach a molecular dynamics simulation expert, unless you have to go to the want to go to the long route of doing the experiments. Somebody like my friend Ravi Venkatramani in our department, or anybody else who does it. And if the structure of the natural protein is known and you are trying to you're looking at some mutations, put those mutations in and ask him to see if the folding happens and if the dynamics is similar. That's the easiest thing to do these days. Molecular dynamics has come a long way. So if you start from a well-known structure, most likely it will give you the right answer. Okay, so Shujit Kumar Das, another of our own students, externally, hi Shujit, externally delivered staples are stapling a particular part of the peptide. How can we ensure that it reacts specifically at that position? Is there any molecular recognition between the desired part and the staples? So in this case, we had a disulfide link and only 2 cysteines. So if you induce stapling, it will only happen there. And I told you that Anirban already does it actually on the bead using some other chemistry, which is very specific. But in general, yes, if you want to do it inside a cell, it will be a challenge. That's something, a person like Vishal Rai would be the best to approach. And he is wonderful. He comes up with wonderful techniques to do it and possibly can be done. So this is an evolving area to stabilize parts of a protein to look like itself for different reasons, whether it's for tackling SARS-CoV-2 or for modifying folding, etc. I bet there'll be more and more techniques available even to do it inside the body or inside the cell. But what we have used are very first level, zero order techniques. And Shubhankar has just thanked me for a wonderful talk. That's the last question. Thank you very much, Shubhankar. And thanks for everybody for sticking around and asking so many questions. That's great. I really, it gives you the feeling that, you have conveyed some of them.